LaxFactor podcast. What is up, college lacrosse fans? You're watching episode 200 and something of the LaxFactor podcast. I'm not even sure today. I'm your host, Ted Hoost, and today we are going to revisit one of my predictions from January of 2022. Early in the year, I made a prediction, and I had my 2022 ACC Lacrosse way too early conference predictions, and I stated at that time UVA was locked and loaded, and I went through and made a bunch of predictions about how I thought the ACC was going to pan out. Now, I wanted to kind of interrupt my whole podcast about all the All-Americans and everything because I got thinking about this and I was like, oh, you know what? I haven't done a follow-up and I'm way overdue for doing this follow-up. I should have done this shortly after the season ended. So I wanted to just throw this in here as I prepare for the defense and the LSM and the face-off All-Americans and do a better job of that. I figured I'd throw this out here and let's revisit, am I smart or am I dumb as it pertains to my prediction for the ACC Lacrosse Conference in 2022. Before I get into it, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with everybody that you know. And as always, you can go to LaxFactor.com and you can actually watch the podcast and see my notes at the same time. One of the new things that I'm doing here is every single podcast episode that comes out that ends up being featured on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you can find it. It also has a big, huge blog post that goes hand in hand that literally represents my notes. You can see my notes here that I took for Sam Handley. And then you can see my notes in the last episode that I took for Graham Bundy Jr. So every single podcast that comes out has my full notes put together with it. Oftentimes you're going to see I read some of the crap verbatim, some of it I don't, but that's the idea now. So if you kind of want to watch the podcast, if you're a YouTube guy or a person, you could actually go to the website. You could watch the YouTube video through the website and then kind of exit full screen every once in a while it still plays and then see some of my notes and some of the pictures and some of the other crap that goes along with it. So that's always there. But let me get into this now. I want to go through why I was just so damn wrong as it pertained to the ACC conference last year, and I have some theories and all that crap. So let's get into it. My first prediction, the ACC would be the best conference in lacrosse and that it wouldn't be close. Now, I want you to give a listen to my actual prediction and to how cocky I get while proclaiming this. So take a listen and we'll come back and we'll talk about the reality afterwards. The ACC. So tough to call because historically everyone's kind of had their share of fun within the ACC. It's stacked top to bottom. The 5 teams in the ACC are all loaded. I'd say it's safe to assume Syracuse, Duke, and UVA, they've had the most success overall in terms of the regular season and tournament wins, but Notre Dame and UNC, I mean, if they're even behind, are only just a smidge behind in that respect. The toughest part about this call is the worst team in the ACC is probably still a top 10 team, maybe a top 12 team in the country, as we saw last year with all of the ACC teams just filling it out top to bottom in the top 20. So it's going from first to worst in the ACC, not really all that bad of a thing overall, because even as the fifth, even if you finish the regular season in the ACC, because there is no ACC tournament, even if you finish the regular season fifth in the ACC, you still have a very good chance of making the tournament. Okay, and now we're back to the reality of it. I'm an idiot. The Big Ten ended up being the best conference overall. Now, you could make that argument because they won the NCAA title via Maryland. But Maryland, they complete the undefeated season. Rutgers had a great year, and even Ohio State knocked off both of the ACC teams they faced. The Big Ten was 7-2 against the ACC overall between the regular season and the NCAA tournament, anchored by Maryland going 4-0 against ACC teams. The rest of the Big Ten was 3-2 against ACC foes. Ohio State picked up 2 ACC wins over UNC and Notre Dame, and even Hopkins got a win against an ACC team, beating Syracuse at home. The Ivy against the ACC, not a lot of contests, 2-2 overall. So right there, you could call that one a wash, except that the Ivy fared well against the Big Ten, and the Ivy thrashed the rest of their non-conference schedule against teams that weren't either the ACC or the Big Ten. So the Big Ten against the Ivy was anchored. Big Ten was 8-7 against the Ivy, anchored by Maryland going 3-0, and both Rutgers and Ohio State splitting 2-2 in the 4 games that they played against the ACC. Rutgers. Now, if we get into the tournament, now this is where I think you can really kind of start making the argument for the Big Ten, not just because Maryland won the title, but kind of overall. If we look at it, Rutgers bounced 2 of the bunch of Ivy League teams that made the tournament. We'll talk about that after, but Rutgers bounced 2 Ivy League teams in the tournament, Harvard and Penn, before losing to Cornell. Maryland bounced 2 Ivy League teams in the tournament, Princeton and Cornell. And then Princeton bounced a fellow Ivy League team, and Virginia bounced another Ivy League team out of the tournament. So as we look at the Final Four, Big and Ivy, it was an all Big Ten and Ivy League Final Four. Cornell ends up beating Rutgers in one of those semifinals, and then Maryland bounced Princeton in the other. And then as it comes down to the finals, a Big Ten team versus an Ivy League team, we know how that ended. Maryland beat Cornell for the title. So my prediction for the best conference in lacrosse overall was that the ACC was going to be it. The reality was the Big won out as their quality was better than the Ivy's quality, even, despite the Ivy having kind of more depth overall, I think. But I think it was clear the Big Ten, best conference in lacrosse. They had Maryland and Rutgers come out of the conference. Both teams made the semifinals, with Maryland winning the final. So the Big Ten wins, and then there's no doubt the Ivy League was the second best conference in the country overall. You could make the argument that the Ivy had a deeper conference for sure. There's no question, but the quality of the Big Ten was better, and they win the title, so they end up winning it. Now, why I was so wrong on this prediction, though, it goes beyond that even, because the ACC wasn't even the third best conference in the country. The Big East could easily claim that third spot due to Georgetown's strength overall. The Patriot could be in the mix. And I'm sure if I did the math, I could probably figure out who officially the third best team was. But my point, you could make the argument the ACC could have been the third best team because the ACC teams overall did well outside of Syracuse. The problem just is that only one ACC team made the tournament. And in the end, that team didn't even make it to the Final Four. So, it's a tough one there. But all that matters was that I was wrong. The ACC was not the strongest conference in the land. I was an ACC maxi, and I shouldn't have been. And I don't think I was insane for doing that. I don't think that at the time I made that prediction, I ate a whole lot of shit for it, because I think a lot of people probably assumed that the ACC, a lot of people were calling for Maryland to be good, but not quite as good, not nearly as good as any of us thought. I thought Maryland was a potential Final Four contender still. I didn't think they were going to run the table and just thrash everybody on the way there. So I don't think that anything that I had stated in this prediction was a hot take. I just think that I got it wrong, and Maryland ended up way overperforming. Rutgers was good again, and I thought Rutgers was going to take a step back. And then the Ivy League's returning. I kind of thought the Ivies might not come back with the force they did, and holy crap, they came back, and it was just an incredible conference all the way through. My next prediction was 4 ACC teams will make the NCAA tournament. Go ahead, listen to me sounding like a moron real quick, and we'll come back and check the reality on that after. Last season, every ACC team got an at-large bid, and any idiot knew that was going to happen. Beginning of the season, I predicted it. A lot of other people did. That was kind of a no-brainer, as loaded as they were overall, especially without the Ivies being in the mix. There was easily one more at-large bid that normally wouldn't have been, because the Ivies weren't playing, and I think that's really what put them over the edge last year. So I think this year probably 4 teams make it out of the ACC. It could be another season where all 5 make it, but because the Ivies are back and Yale and company, Cornell, they're all going to be pretty good still. I think that at least 4 ACC teams make it, with the potential for all 5. Okay, back to reality. 1 ACC team made the NCAA tournament. That was Virginia, obviously. Duke was close, as was Notre Dame, but their bad losses ended up being greater than their best wins, largely because of how many non-conference losses all of these ACC teams had. Even Virginia lost some odd non-conference games overall. And teams like Notre Dame, where Virginia was forced to play Syracuse twice, but they played more games than Notre Dame, so they had more chances to pick up decent wins, whereas Notre Dame played a limited schedule, and 2 of those games were against Syracuse. Now, granted, Notre Dame won both of those contests, but it used to be that Syracuse would be a big strength of schedule boost for the other teams in the ACC that had to play them twice, and that was kind of how the ACC operated. You ended up picking up, 4 games against 2 teams, and they were usually highly ranked enough that was a big boon for your schedule. Not this year, with Syracuse being 4-10. They dragged Notre Dame's schedule into the dirt, And in the end, only one ACC team made the tournament. That was Virginia. Duke was one of those teams that was left out. Notre Dame was one of those teams that was left out. And you could have made an argument for either one, but Duke lost to Syracuse. Notre Dame played Syracuse twice, and that's just too many times to play a crappy team like that when you didn't have enough games on your schedule to pick up other wins, and that ended up hurting them. So I predicted 4 ACC teams were going to make the tournament. 1 did. I am dumb, and I apologize. Now, my next prediction, and this is really my last prediction overall in terms of the ACC. I'll do a separate video about my tournament predictions and things like that all together as we lead into the season and we get bored. But I picked the order of the ACC, and this is where I actually got it right for the most part, and I think my bias for Syracuse screwed just flopped my 5th and my 4th. So I picked, here, before I even tell you who I picked, just listen to the prediction real quick, and then we'll go from there. But number 5, and I'm picking number 5 here, is this is the team that I think will end up finishing last in the ACC, and some will call me crazy, North Carolina. And it pains me to put my favorite team in the world this low on any list. So to be clear, I'm an idiot, and I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that Cuse finishes number 1 in the ACC, wins a natty in Gary Gates' first season as the kingpin. However, just like North Carolina, Cuse had some key losses. Offensively, they had some losses. Defensively, big losses that we'll talk about here. One big loss anyway. And those losses mean that they're going to kind of be forced to show us all what's up. My number 3 team, and this is where, like I said, all 5 of these teams are going to be great. All 5 of these teams have a chance at making the tournament no matter where they finish within the ACC standings. But my number 3 team, Duke. Number 2, Notre Dame. And I think this is one I think a lot of people are going to be surprised that I picked it this way. But I mean, I'm high on Notre Dame. I've been smoking what Notre Dame has been handing me. Virginia, number 1. It's getting boring now that Virginia is just so loaded. All right, so what I did pick in the end, just to recap that because I'm not sure how that played out in the video, I picked UNC as number 5, Syracuse as number 4, Duke as number 3, Notre Dame as number 2, and Virginia as number 1. The reality was I wasn't too bad there. The true order was UVA, Notre Dame, Duke. I got the top 3 right, and then I flip-flopped North Carolina and Syracuse. North Carolina ended up being 4th. Syracuse was in the basement. Like I said, my bias probably got in the way of me nailing this one because I didn't want to admit out loud that Syracuse was probably going to take last place in the ACC. That ends up hurting me. But worse than my bias for Syracuse is what Syracuse's down year did overall for the ACC. Now, Syracuse's upset of Duke was probably just the nail in the coffin for a Duke team that was already on the bubble. Now, you lose to a 4-10 team like Syracuse, that's your worst loss. Now, Duke also lost to Loyola, and they had some other non-conference losses. But those losses, a couple of them, I think, were to tournament teams in the end, even if they weren't teams that traditionally Duke would lose to. But if you want to guarantee missing out on the tournament, by all means, lose to a 4-10 team. That's absolutely going to help your cause. So Cuse dragged Duke into the crapper and just put the final nail in the coffin for them not making the tournament. And then, like I said earlier in the podcast, Notre Dame, they were forced to play Syracuse twice. Again, normally it would be a boost to your strength of schedule. But this year, despite Notre Dame beating up on them both times, the committee was forced to yawn at the fact they had to play Syracuse twice. And they ended up being one of, I think, like the first 3 teams out. Notre Dame's ranking by the end of the year was so high considering they didn't get in. Now, granted, that loss to Ohio State didn't help them out. But if you kind of replaced one of those Cuse games with a team like, let's say, like a Richmond, and you pick up a win, Notre Dame probably gets in. So even though they go 2-0 against 4-10 Syracuse, that certainly did not help them, which means in the end, it hurt them more than it helped them in terms of getting them into the tournament. So that hurt also. Now, in the end, I think the ACC is going to have a huge rebound year, and I'll do my way too early predictions here for the conferences and things like that as we approach January. I usually like to do those right after the new year starts. I'll do at least the ACC and the Big Ten. Maybe we throw in a Big East as well. It's just the ACC and the Big Ten are the easiest ones to do, and they get the most views. And then probably Georgetown will anchor a Big East video as well. But in the end, I was way wrong on this. The LaxFactor Podcast.